I am Arthur Donovan. I am the Emeritus Professor of Surgery and former Chairman of the Department of Surgery, and I will interview Dr. Alan Mathies, who was the Dean of the School of Medicine from 1975 to 1985. I think I will begin by asking Dr. Mathies to tell us a bit about his background and why he and how he arrived at USC.
Thank you, Art. I actually grew up in Colorado, went to Colorado College, and then went to Columbia University and got a PhD in parasitology. It was my goal to get both a PhD and an MD and be a parasitologist, as I felt that this would allow me to understand the organism and the host. When I finished my PhD, I was offered the opportunity to go to the University of Vermont and teach parasitology while going to medical school, and so I did my medical degree in Vermont. As a senior medical student, I took an elective in Southern California at the LA County Hospital with Marge Biddle, who was a microbiologist on the staff at the county. And my wife was from Southern California. Her parents were greatly involved with Children's Hospital, and through that I had the opportunity to meet the dean at that time, Clayton Loosely. And Clayton said, we hope you'll come and be an intern and join our faculty here. There's a young man named Paul Worley who's coming from Syracuse in April of '61, and I was going to come in July of '61. And he said, I think you'll find that he's just the right kind of person for you. He's interested in infectious diseases. He's a pediatrician, but he chairs the Department of Microbiology at Syracuse right now. So his goals and yours sound like they're going in the same direction, and maybe you'd like to come. So I came in 1961 as an intern in rotating internship, and then followed with a residency in pediatrics, finishing in 1964, and was offered the opportunity to be the head physician of the communicable disease service at the county. Los Angeles had the same, that central pest house theory that many of the large cities had, so that all patients, private or public, with certain diseases had to come to this particular CD service. And it was my chance to run a 60-bed service that saw a large number of patients with meningitis, typhoid, diarrheas, tuberculosis, even diphtheria, that we had the epidemic at a time when all the new antibiotics were coming along, the penicillin derivatives, the new cephalosporins, gentamicin, vaccines for measles, German measles, mumps. It was a glorious time to be engaged in that kind of activity.
You mentioned Dr. Clayton Loosely as dean. Would you want to comment on what you think his sort of role and impact was on the School of Medicine?
Clayton came from University of Chicago and had been an active researcher there. And when he came in 1956 to be the dean, he began to change the character of the school, which was essentially a school that did an excellent job of training physicians to go to practice, but had little in the way of research activity going on. It was a time when the NIH was increasing their support, and he was able to, I think, change the faculty by recruiting new people like Paul Worley and others who were interested in research and had the capability of getting research grants, and really sort of changed the character of the school.
I think he was actually recruited here by the faculty for that purpose, I believe.
I think that's right, yes.
I think the university was ready to move the medical school more in the direction of research.
Yes, it was the time for the change, and,
right.
and it had gone through a period just before Clayton came where the school was actually run by a committee of faculty.
Right. Well, the School of Medicine had actually moved to the health science campus basically in 1960, 61. So, and then he initiated, I believe, a master plan for some of the construction on the health science campus.
There was a board of counselors at that time for the School of Medicine, headed by Ken Norris Sr., who was a trustee of the university, and they set out, along with Norman Topping, who was the president, a master plan for the campus, which would include research buildings, library, and what was at that time sort of a grandiose plan for the School of Medicine, which had previously been housed here at the University Park campus.
Right. The next dean of the School of Medicine was Roger Egeberg. Might ask you to make some comments about, we might ask you to make some comments about Roger himself first, and then some of the events that occurred during his deanship.
Well, Roger is probably best known for being MacArthur's personal physician during World War II. When he came back, he was trained as an internist. He joined the Department of Health for the County of Los Angeles after having some time at the Veterans Administration, and was the medical director at the county hospital. He subsequently became the medical director for all county hospitals, and was actually on the search committee to select the new dean when Clayton Loosely stepped down in 1964. He emerged as the leading candidate and became the dean. Roger was about 6'4", perhaps, and 250 pounds or maybe more. A very gregarious individual whose use of four-letter words has never been bettered, as far as I know. But when he said them, you were not offended.
Exactly.
I mean, he was perfectly fine with doing that. When he came, he had this look of trying to reach out to the community more than what we had been doing. We were essentially doing everything at the county hospital, and he, it was also a time of unrest. The Watts riots occurred during his tenure, and he managed to create a Department of Community Medicine and move out into the community to get more in the way of activity there. He also responded to the national plea to increase the number of medical graduates and made a plan to increase the class size from 68 to 96. Our facilities could accommodate that increase, and we were being paid capitation dollars during that time. And that
by the federal government.
By the federal government, and that allowed us then to do this without putting the school in financial jeopardy.
Right. During his deanship, the College of Medical Evangelists moved to Loma Linda from the county hospital, and the California College of Medicine, the successor of the California College of Osteopathy, moved to UC Irvine. You want to comment on the impact of that on the School of Medicine and its relationship and its responsibilities at the county hospital?
Well, it really had two major effects. One, we suddenly had a huge responsibility of taking care of the patients, and did not have as many faculty as were needed in order to do that. But that was the opportunity then. We had a great number of faculty slots to fill because they would get county items, and a contract with the county, which had previously given us a fairly small amount of money, was increased considerably with the departure of those two schools, so that we could recruit faculty and change the character. So it was the LA County USC Medical Center. It wasn't the County General Hospital. On the other hand, from the standpoint of the accrediting bodies, they were concerned that this clinical group was responsibilities were so overwhelming that they only gave us a 3-year accreditation when the LCME came around to accredit the School of Medicine.
I was not aware.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that one.
Right, yes.
Okay. What about minority recruitment?
Oh, he was strong in that area. He He managed to get a grant from the Macy Foundation to establish a Office of Minority Recruitment, and staffed it so that we could begin to better reflect the community that we served by having increasing numbers of African Americans and Latinos. African Americans were the focus early on, and then Latinos later on.
As we know, Dr. Egeberg was recruited to be the Assistant Secretary of HEW for Health by President Nixon, and departed after 5 years as dean, just about 5 years
Yes,
as dean.
yes.
Was succeeded by Dr. Franz Bauer. Would you want to comment on, I think it was under Franz that you first developed administrative responsibilities at the School of Medicine as a whole, rather than in pediatrics solely.
Right.
Would you comment in that regard?
That's true. Franz Bauer was Roger Egeberg's associate dean. He was an internist with specialty in nuclear medicine, and had been both at USC and also at Harbor with a UCLA faculty appointment. When Roger became the dean, he recruited Franz to be his associate dean. Franz's wife was a member of our faculty as a professor of dermatology. Franz was the son of a distinguished pair of physicians who he'd grown up in Europe, in Vienna, where his father had been a professor, and who emigrated to the United States in the 30s. In fact, his father was also on the faculty as a senior consulting kind of voluntary professor at USC. Franz was very strong with the county. He focused his attention on trying to increase the county contract and to also respond to the continued demand to increase the class size. So we went from a class size starting in 1969 during his tenure to 1974, class increased from 96 to 136. We couldn't do that without additional money, and so Franz and the dean at Stanford and the dean at Loma Linda got together and said, we will take an additional 100 students in combined, 40 for USC, 40 for Loma Linda, and 20 at Stanford, if you will pay us state capitation dollars. Well, the state was thinking of developing another medical school, and this was much better for them financially to pay us a capitation of $12,000 per student than it was to try and build a $100 million campus and then fund it with kind of dollars. We did the math, and we said we could for $6 million a year, essentially, which would be the interest on their $100 million campus, create the same number of students that they would.
But $12,000 compared to today's tuition.
Yes, that would, well, even $12,000 would help on the $40,000 tuition. The other thing that Franz did was to say, I will be the dean for not less than 2 or more than 5 years. And he appointed a new group of people, and I was one, as an associate dean, and Doug Frazier as dean for student affairs, Dan Eibler for dean of admissions. Now, my problem when I became the associate dean was to say, I know what these other people are doing, Franz. I mean, one's admissions, one's student aid, and so on. But what does the associate dean do? And he said, you do whatever I want you to do. And when I'm not here, you act as the dean. And it was a wonderful learning experience. I got to participate in recruitment of faculty. Franz didn't care very much about money, or he hated doing budgets. So he said, you can do the budgets for the department. He didn't like allocating space. You can do the space for the departments. Well, those are the two things that really give the dean power, is to allocate the money for the budget and allocate the space for the faculty. So I really had a wonderful apprenticeship during the the
Franz Bauer
tenure.
Going back to Roger for a moment, Roger went for a cancer planning grant when that was offered, and I know he did that as a way that he thought he could acquire funds to expand the basic science faculties at the time. But then that went on to become the award of the National Cancer Center Award, which came while Franz was dean. Yeah.
Right. Denny Hammond, who was a professor of pediatrics at the Children's Hospital and a well-known hematologist oncologist, was asked by Franz to be the associate dean for the Cancer Center development, and we actually put together a program, recruited faculty, and in I think it was 1974, after a lot of planning, were designated one of the first 6 comprehensive cancer centers in the United States. Now, in order to do that, you had to do patient care, basic research, clinical research, epidemiology, and education. And you had to have programs in each of those. And Denny Hammond, in association with the department chair, pulled people from our current faculty and put them into groupings so that they could satisfy this kind of designation. He subsequently, of course, then went ahead and applied for a construction grant so that we could build a hospital, first in association with the county.
Yeah, this is an important
to house the patient care for the cancer people, and that sort of stretched across Franz's tenure as dean and mine as the interim dean in 74 to 75, and then the dean in 75 on.
Well, the original plan for the cancer hospital, just jumping ahead a little bit, but that was to be a joint venture between the county and USC.
Yes.
As a sort of a bridging, I remember there was going to be a bridge across Zonal Avenue.
Correct.
With the basic science on one side and the patients on the other side. That then went to a bond issue for the county, and the county the voters did not approve that bond issue, and the county withdrew.
That's correct.
And
the county was supposed to come up with at least $18 million, and USC was going to raise 6, and the federal government was going to put in 12. So we would have $36 million to build this. And actually, the application to the federal government came from the county because it was the LA County USC
Right.
Cancer Center. And when the county withdrew their support, then we didn't have a way to access that $12 million grant from the National Cancer Institute, which we had been awarded. And so we had to reapply and try and see if we could, as USC, get that cancer grant, recognizing that if we did this, all the rest of the money would have to come from philanthropy or university support. And that was the genesis, really, of the Norris Cancer Center. And the lead gift was given by Ken Norris Jr., which got us a long way away towards the construction of that cancer center.
if I could just editorialize for a minute, I think this decision was made after you had become dean.
Correct.
And it seems to me that that was a absolutely pivotal decision and a 180-degree change in direction for the University of Southern California in terms of it was taking responsibility now for a facility that was going to provide patient care rather than being totally dependent on the County of Los Angeles and to a lesser degree some affiliated hospitals.
That's true. It was a 180-degree turn. You will remember that Norman Topping, who was the president of USC, had been vice president for health affairs at the University of Pennsylvania before he came to USC as president. And he thought owning a university hospital or something that had to do with patient care was the worst thing that could ever happen. And so actually in 1973, when Dr. Bauer was the dean, National Medical Enterprises had offered to build a university hospital for us. We had just had a report called Medicine in the 80s by a task force of faculty that had been presented to the university for our long-range plan, and one of them was to support the fact that the county hospital would be rebuilt with a new building. Of course, that's happening now, some 25, 30 years later. And that we should have a place in which we could do private practice, because being dependent upon the county alone was possibly put the school in jeopardy. But the university turned down that offer to build a university hospital at that time. And I think in large part it was Norman Topping's influence with the trustees and the administration, even though he was no longer the president, that convinced them that they would not enter into that. So when we got the opportunity to do the cancer hospital, and I think in part it was because it was limited patient care. There were only 60 beds inside the hospital, and the rest was going to be outpatient, that the university felt that the thrust and the opportunity to do this was so much, put us so much farther ahead as far as the research and that translational kind of research from the bench to the patient and so forth, that it was good for the school.
But it in a way did start the school on a path which has taken it to where it is today, which we will kind of get to in a little bit.
It did.
But going back to the period of when Franz Bauer was the dean, at that time there was a master plan committee set up for the county hospital too. Would you want to comment on that?
Yes, there was. That occurred in actually 68, 69, and Roger Egeberg was the one who appointed the committee and appointed Franz to be the chair of the committee. And both you and I were members of that as young faculty at that time. And that was a plan to really look at the county hospital in a different way. Regionalization was coming about as far as incorporating some of the clinics that were in the community as part of the USC LA County sphere of influence. And we spent hours, 2 hours twice a week in the committee for a number of years. Actually, shortly after the committee was formed, Dr. Egeberg left, Franz became the dean, and I got appointed the chair of the master plan committee.
I remember the committee very well. I think the stimulus for that committee actually came from a proposal that went to Washington to build new operating rooms at the county hospital.
Probably
did.
And
the federal government came out and inspected and looked for a site visit and said, you have no master plan. And Roger appointed that master plan committee. Another matter that arose basically during Franz Bauer's deanship was the appointment of a vice president for health affairs.
We, as the health science campus, and actually we were just the medical school campus until 1974, 75, when pharmacy came to the health science campus, felt that we were 25% or 30% of the university budget, and we were 6 miles away from the rest of the university, and we were not represented as broadly as we thought we should be in the university higher administration in making decisions. And so one of the recommendations for planning for the 80s, Dr. Manning's task force, was that we do have a vice president for health affairs. And so a search was made, and in 1974 there was appointed the first vice president for health affairs, a gentleman named Ed Ackel, who was both an MD and a dentist, and had been in a similar position at the University of Florida. Dr. Ackel was in that position for about 3 years during my tenure as dean. He came actually after Dr. Bauer left. But then he went to be the president of Virginia Commonwealth University, and Dr. Vandermeulen, who was the chair of neurology and sort of the first neurology full-time chair, appointed, became the vice president for health affairs in 1977.
Did you as dean, did the deans report to the president through the vice president for health affairs?
Yes, we did, and that was a concern for me, because when we had important issues to get forward, and we reported to the vice president, and the vice president was the one who in part carried the message to either the chair or to the president or to the board of trustees and so forth. And if we got turned down, I never knew whether it was a bad idea or whether it not been presented appropriately because someone else was speaking for me. And so we really, after having that vice president position in place, I think found that it probably was not a position that was needed, and we would do much better to go, as the other schools in the university did, either to the provost directly, because the vice president and the provost were in a sort of a sparring mood as well, as far as resources and allocation there.
But did you ultimately report to the office of the president, or you always went through the vice president?
During my tenure, we always went through the vice president.
Any other comments you would like to make with respect to your role as associate dean in the period in which Franz Bauer was the dean?
Well, there were two things I think that were important during that time. Again, we were moving from a school that had relied heavily on the contributions of voluntary faculty, particularly in the surgical specialties. And during Franz's tenure as dean, and then we recruited a new chair of ophthalmology as the first full-time chair. He came actually the year I became the dean as an interim, and that was Steve Ryan, who subsequently served the school as the dean of the School of Medicine. The other was the establishment of the Department of Emergency Medicine. It was a discipline that had not been recognized as a medical specialty, and we felt that we should do that and have a separate department. And so Franz actually established that and recruited Dr. Gail Anderson, an obstetrician from our faculty, to be the chair of that department. One other thing.
Yes.
And that was the appointment of chair of anatomy. The previous chair had been in that position for 28 years.
Paul Paddock.
Paul Paddock, and a longtime faculty member before he became the chair. When we went to recruit the chair, we found that the one we wanted to accept would say he would not come unless he got a 12-month salary. Prior to that time, all basic science faculty were paid, like university faculty, a 9-month salary. The clinical people were essentially paid mostly by the county of Los Angeles, and they, of course, had 12-month salaries there. And so Doug Kelly, who was our new chair of anatomy, said, I'll come, but I need to have a 12-month salary. Well, we agreed, but that was the beginning of conversion of all those faculty then in basic sciences from 9 months to 12 months, because it was obviously viewed as discriminatory if he was paid for 12 months and everybody else was paid for 9. So.
And you had the funds to do that?
Well, we scraped the funds to do it. Actually, it was a very difficult time when this happened during my tenure. We pushed and moved the faculty to try and get research grants as much as they could, to pay themselves perhaps 25% of their salary off their research grant, and by doing that free up some dollars then to be reallocated to make everybody essentially a 12-month salaried individual. if their research grant failed, of course, the school was on the hook to pick up the dollars.
Yeah. There are a few other matters that went on, I might say, for the point of this interview during that period of time, which I think I will talk about when you interview me, but such as curriculum and
Right.
research committee
Right.
and
Right.
some other matters, and we will sort of defer that to my interview.
Exactly.
Also, as Dean, comment on the Board of Counselors, would you?
Yes, the Board of Counselors, which I referred to earlier during Dr. Loosley's tenure, had really drifted, and there essentially there was no Board of Counselors for a long time. And then Dr. Bauer, during his tenure, decided to once again develop that, and we did develop a Board of Counselors. Actually, Dr. Topping, Chancellor of the university at that time, was the first chair, and he recruited some very strong people. 2 or 3 were trustees of the university. Others were people in the community that had influence to come and be the Board of Counselors. Board of Counselors essentially was a concept that was formed during Dr. Topping's tenure as president, and each school had a Board of Counselors, and they would advise the dean and administration as far as the direction of the school. Our Board of Counselors, which was headed by Dr. Topping first and then Sid Barton, was very influential in helping me convince the university administration of the direction in which the school should go. And we relied heavily on them. The fact that we could take some faculty and the Board of Counselors and go to a retreat in the desert or down in Newport or something like that, and have these individuals who were influential hear from the faculty the direction that the school really should go, was very important.
The relationship of the School of Medicine to the university. It's always the faculty claimed that the university was taking money from the School of Medicine, and the School of Medicine claimed that they were paying too much. And
well, I think this is a problem that's inherent with all organizations in which you have some kind of a central administrative body that needs to be supported, and the support comes from the units that are generating the revenue. And you say, well, if we're providing 25% of the budget of the university, are we getting 25% of the president's time? And obviously the answer is no, you're not. We went back and forth as to what our appropriate share should be as far as the university was concerned. And during President Zumberg's time, there was a fairly heavy emphasis on trying to rationalize all this by giving subventions to certain schools within the university that were not eligible or not able to generate the revenue, but were critical to the mission of the school. We actually ended up, I think, most of the time, just about paying our fair share as far as the university was concerned.
Going back to the Los Angeles County for a moment and that relationship, the expansion of the county contract toward the end of Roger Egeberg's deanship and Franz Bauer, under Franz Bauer, to what extent did that increase the size of the faculty? Just what was the magnitude of that expansion?
I can't remember the total numbers, but it was close to doubling it.
Yes,
the size of the faculty. And that that really allowed us to do so many other things that we had not been able to do before, and have the opportunity for faculty to participate in more research. On the other hand, it did something different in a sense that now we had all these full-time faculty, and some of them that we recruited did not appreciate the wonderful, historic, valiant kind of effort of the voluntary faculty, which had been there for for many years, and I know you'll want to talk more about that when you talk about your particular discipline, because it was so important in the surgical disciplines.
And in that county contract, do you want to comment on the contract hour matter that?
Well, that far more of a problem than how much we paid to the Central University Administration was how did we justify the $10 million that we were getting from the county by the number of hours. And that number of hours actually were those donated by the voluntary faculty, plus those of the full-time faculty who were on county salaries over and above the 40 hours a week that they were required to work. And it was, like many things, a matter of documentation. How can you prove one way or another that you gave all those hours? However, in 1978, as Proposition 13 came along and the taxes were capped, the county contract, which had been growing very nicely, suddenly was cut by 10%. At the same time that the university mandated a salary increase of about 10%. And so we really had to struggle in the medical school to once again, try and find the funds, whether they were restricted dollars for a while rather than the unrestricted dollars, to pay the faculty to get by. I actually felt that we had to let some faculty go during that period of time who we otherwise would have kept, but we didn't have the resources.
Now, there's the relationship between the county and the university, which had been one of increasing support over the years, really, as you've plateaued after Proposition 13,
yes,
which really quite changed the dynamics.
It did, and once again, it pointed up that we needed a revenue source other than the County of Los Angeles, and tuition and research grants in order to support the school.
Right. And also with respect to the county, we've talked about the LA County Hospital, but there were also there was the relationship with the Rancho.
Yes, yeah, we did have a relationship with Rancho as one of our affiliated hospitals and owned by the county. That was one which was important to the university because it also had the physical therapy and occupational therapy programs that were based there, that were part of the university program. And there was that thrust at Rancho to say, we're going to approach patient care in a team basis. And so as we rotated students down there, they were exposed to this kind of experience in which it wasn't just the physician who was calling the shots. It was the physician and the nurse and the physical therapist and the occupational therapist, because this was a rehabilitation institution, and each of them had something to offer as far as the rehabilitation of that patient.
If we could go back to the, before that, the Children's Hospital and the pediatrics program and the relationship with the university, the Children's Hospital.
Oh, Children's Hospital is the longest affiliate hospital that USC had, other than the county, and that was founded in 1932. The relationship was established in 1932. This created a bit of a problem because for a while we had, for quite a while, we had two departments of pediatrics, one at the county hospital and one at the Children's Hospital. The Children's Hospital was well funded by philanthropy, and of course it had patient care that generated a lot of revenue, and they in order to recruit the faculty that they wished, needed to have the university tie. So all the full-time people at Children's were full-time university faculty. The Children's Hospital would pay the university the amount of money that they were going to pay these faculty at the Children's Hospital, and in turn USC would send back the dollars. That was part of the contention as to whether the university should take a certain percentage of those dollars off as its fair share, and we managed to say no, that wouldn't work, and so they didn't. It was just a pure pass-through from the Children's Hospital to the USC and then to the faculty who were there. This allowed us to do a number of things and allow them to be considered one of the 5 best children's hospitals in the country.
The development of the Doheny Eye Foundation? in the hospital?
Oh, that was another one of the strengths. It was during Dr. Bauer's tenure that we were able to convince the Doheny Foundation to come and buy a piece of land from the university and establish the Doheny Eye Clinic. And that's allowed us then to recruit Dr. Ryan to come, because there was a place where he could see patients, private patients, begin to develop a private practice, which he was very insistent on as one of the things that he needed to do. But he didn't have then a place to do his inpatient kind of care. And so he actually, early on, and the faculty he recruited were at the Huntington Hospital for their patient care. And as patient care in the private sector increased, we had faculty everywhere. I mean, we had the Good Samaritan for the surgeons and
OBGYN.
and OBGYN, and we had the California Hospital for some of the OBGYN and radiation therapy, and we had the neurosurgeons at the Huntington and the neurologists at the Good Sam, which were a way in which you could begin to develop some revenues, but it was not organized, and there was no way in which the departments of anesthesia or pathology or radiology could do that kind of
Which
thing.
brings me into what I was going to come to next, which is this was clearly one of the needs for a university hospital, was to have a site in which all of these faculties and departments could function together.
Exactly, right.
That was one reason. Other reasons for the university hospital is recruitment.
Recruitment, right, and just like Dr. Ryan coming with his the clinic, then we had the development of the Doheny Eye Hospital, and it was built actually adjacent to where the university hospital is built at the moment, and again was a way in which we could recruit faculty.
The recruitment of faculty to the, particularly in the surgical disciplines, as I'm well aware, based purely upon a county salary with a modest university supplement, simply was
non-competitive.
It was impossible. You could not recruit
Right.
On that basis. When I am interviewed by you subsequently, I will comment on some in that regard, but particularly urology and thoracic surgery.
Yeah.
But so the needs were, but the need was obvious to the faculty. But could you give us a little bit of the sequence of events which led to the decision to build the university hospital, and how the decisions were made?
We're now about the change in leadership from Hubbard to President Zumberg, and it was in the latter part of '81 that President Zumberg came to the medical campus and had a meeting with all the faculty in the Mayer Auditorium. We had already established some towards Century 2 goals of fundraising, and the medical schools had $10 million to build a diagnostic clinic that we could see patients in an outpatient setting, private patients, some chairs, and also some more money for the cancer program. And the faculty said to President Zumberg, how about a university hospital? And he said, that's not in the planning. I see no way in which a university hospital will ever occur. So a month after that, I appointed a faculty committee chaired by Denny Hammond to try and see, is there a way in which we can develop a university hospital? And they did an extensive study. They talked with 4 hospital firms, HCA, AMI, NME, looked at the possibility of buying part of the county hospital, like the Peds Pavilion or the Women's Unit, and tried to see if that could be converted. The upshot of it all was, after the committee report was received in 1982, and that was just when the Doheny Eye Hospital groundbreaking was occurring. It was again reiterated by NME that they would be willing to develop a relationship in which they would build the university hospital. The next 2 years, until '84, late, I was spending my time along with faculty trying to convince the university administration and trying to make sure that NME continued to have the strong support in order to do it. Critical to that was the fact that the Norris Hospital was up and running and not losing money.
Right.
And so I think the university said, well, maybe if we don't have the exposure to own the hospital, but could control it somehow by having all our faculty practice there, we could enter into this. And that resulted in the signing in the late '84, early '85 of the agreement between the Board of Directors of NME and the Board of Trustees of USC to build a university hospital.
Pursuing that a little bit further, Board of Counselors helpful to you in this regard?
They were extraordinarily helpful.
That's a leading question.
They were. You know, to hear the voice of 2 or 3 of the trustees of the university who also happened to be sitting on the Board of Counselors was extraordinarily helpful. Yeah. And it was the fact
Galpin.
Kenny Galpin, Virginia Ramo, Howard Payne, who had been a president of the Alumni Association and by virtue of that, a former member of the Board of Trustees, and the Chancellor, Norman Topping, who came around and said, you know, I think we can do this, and then it's time.
The university, the land acquisition and that negotiation with the county to obtain the land for the university hospital. I realize that was finalized just after you
That
stepped down,
actually happened after I left, and
but it was initiated under you.
It was initiated, right. And it was very very tenuous, and it took much longer than you would expect. Yeah. But all of that had to do with how could we do this in an organized fashion so that the faculty practice in that hospital and elsewhere would support the school.
Right.
And that meant a long and arduous kind of development of a faculty practice plan, which I will let you talk about when we interview you. Yeah. But I would just say another line that was sort of interesting is that when Steve Ryan came, he said, now I'm going to be in practice, private practice, and we ought to support the school. And I don't want you to, you know, look over my shoulder all the time about how I spend the money. So I want to give you, well, we negotiated 6% of the gross revenue of our practice. And I said, fine, and that would go to the school and we could do whatever we wanted. Now his business year was always ended on May 31st, and we would be negotiating budgets for the following year in June for the university. And so proudly, Steve would come in and hand me a check the 1st of June and say, here's our 6% from the practice. I can remember one year it was $180,000. And then turned around and asked me for $250,000 worth of faculty support for the next year. So he was playing the game appropriately.
Did the Children's Hospital tithe to the university? They did not.
They did not.
No, I don't think they did.
No.
What about budget? During your years from when you joined the administration with Franz till you stepped down as dean, what was the magnitude of growth in the budget and the research budget?
I wish I could give you those figures exactly.
I should have.
But unfortunately, the tuition went up about 300%
right.
in the course of time. The research budget went up about 100%. The endowment went up a little over 100% during that time, and so we were successful.
Major growth.
Yeah, we were successful in major growth.
Who do you think the people were that had the greatest impact on the school and on you during your tenure?
Well, clearly my colleague Paul Worley, who was the chairman of pediatrics, and he and I were close associates. As families as well as professional colleagues. Franz Bauer as a mentor was very important to me. You, Arthur, Donovan, were very important to me, particularly as you were the chairman of the Department of Surgery. I had so many friends and colleagues that I could work with. The county relationship was always strong in that medical director role. Bob Tronquata first, and then Saul Bernstein, who came, who I felt that I could go and talk about concerns for both of us, and we would come to some very good solutions.
Right. What about staff people, your staff?
Well, the staff, I had wonderful colleagues, Dick Webster and Harry Bernhardt, who were associate deans for administration, Louise Ball, who was my assistant, and I had a wonderful secretary. Donna Nelson had been secretary to Clayton Loosely, Roger Egeberg. Franz Bauer had his own secretary when she came back from Washington, where she had gone with Roger. And so I inherited her as my secretary as associate dean, and for the 16 years that I did all that, she was my wonderful assistant, kept the calendar, and as Roger had said about Donna, she had the kind of personality that she could tell a senator, well, honey, he'll be with you in a little while, and get away with it.
Yeah. Okay. What were the biggest challenges you think you had as dean?
Well, I think obviously money is always a very large challenge, and the other was to try and change the character of the school from being one that was viewed as a county hospital school to one that was a strong school with research, patient care, and one that would be attractive to everyone in the community. Trying to get out into the community and give that message, and not create difficulties with our affiliates, because we had affiliations with the Good Samaritan Hospital, the Huntington Hospital, the Orthopedic Hospital, the California Hospital, all of whom were important in our teaching programs, but you didn't want to alienate them by pushing the university too hard.
The
recruitment is always difficult into Southern California because of housing. And actually, I'm proud to say that during our tenure, we managed to get the university to change its housing support plan so that they could take second mortgages and allow some young faculty who came to get some support.
Right. The any other comments you want to, things that we haven't covered that you would like to?
No, I think not. In 1985, we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the School of Medicine, and it was marvelous. It was a time when I had finished 10 years as being the dean, and 11 if you count the interim year, which I did count because I've acted like the dean in that interim as well. And I thought we'd accomplished a number of things during my tenure that I was very proud of: the building of the Norris Cancer Center, the establishment of the faculty practice plan, the change of the basic science from 9 months to 12 months, and then the arrangement to build the university hospital. And so I thought it was appropriate time for me to step down.
You want to comment on what you did then?
Well, I did. I went to the Huntington Hospital, one of our affiliates, as the president and CEO for the next 10 years. And during that time, I think strengthened the affiliation with the university, and also managed to create for them a master plan and build a new hospital.
What was you want to comment on the different aspects of being dean of the medical school and president of a large community hospital?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of differences. I missed the intellectual stimulation of being the dean and having faculty come. I said at one point in my tenure at the Huntington that I had a couple $100,000 that I would give in support of establishing a program. If I had said that at the university, I'd have had 15 proposals on my desk by the end of the week. I couldn't get anybody in the community hospital to step forward because they were all busy in their practices to do that.
Different environment.
Different environment. On the other hand, I was the CEO at the university, at the Huntington. And so I reported directly to the board of trustees and directors. And if I couldn't sell a project then, I knew it was my fault and not the fact that there was
Someone
2
in
or 3
between.
intermediates.
Right, yeah. Have you remained active at USC during these years?
Well, right now I serve on a committee at the medical school. Actually, it's a university committee called the Institutional Biosafety Committee. This committee is designed to try and assure that the laboratory experiments that have to do with gene transfer and use of retroviruses and so on in the laboratory or in the patients, assure that the people engaged are going to be safe. We're looking out for the fact that the laboratory technicians and the investigators and so forth also need to be protected, not just patient safety as you would in an institutional review board and so on. So that keeps me there, and of course I do go to football games.
Yeah. Any other comments you would like to make? Any other things you'd
No,
like to?
I think
we've
that's
covered
good.
most of the.
It's been a wonderful association, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.